historical legends
Ouch.
was the ancient Greek belief of the ferryman Charon. The Greeks believed that people who had been given proper funeral rites after they had passed meet a ferryman who they can pay to carry them directly to Hades. Charon would perform this service for the small price of 1 obol, a small silver coin that was usually placed under the tongue of the deceased. But for Greeks that were not given proper funeral rites, or for some reason were not able to pay the 1 obol, they were relegated to wandering the shores of the river Styx for a century before they were allowed entry into Hades. But the superstition of leaving money on the deceased, I believe, is probably a much older tradition than the Greeks, and it lasted much longer than that too, well into the 18th and even early 19th century. Even in North America, there was a time when people would place pennies over the eyes of the deceased as a way to honor them after they pass. The ancient Egyptians believed, hands down, the most complicated and tedious process for passing on to the afterlife out of every belief system that I've ever seen, describing all of the challenges and trials that their soul would encounter on their path to their version of the kingdom of heaven. According to the Egyptians, the deceased would have to encounter a multitude of tests on their path to the afterlife, and at the end of this road, they would meet Anubis or one of his guards, where they would be expected to pay him money in order to be granted access to their afterlife kingdom. And if they weren't able to pay the toll, their soul would either be lost forever or returned back to the earth, forced to live yet another lifetime. The Egyptian belief system kind of scares me a little bit. When I first found it, to me it came across as a bit elitist. Only the higher ranking members of their society would have been considered worthy enough to pass those trials and make it into heaven. Even according to the Egyptians, only the most cunning and best prepared souls would have been able to pass these tests. Only a select few members of their society would have even had access to the Book of the Dead to give them the information they need to pass the tests. So even if every Egyptian was somehow able to pay the toll, they wouldn't have had the information required to even get them to the gate of Anubis in the first place. And if that's by design, then it seems like that's kind of an evil belief system that's designed for the elite, to make them feel like only they will make it to heaven, and heaven won't be overcrowded by working or labor class people. This belief system would have allowed the elite to feel like they're being let in on something special that's exclusive just to them, something to which they would have felt entitled because of their special status. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not by design. Maybe the Book of the Dead is telling the truth. But there are much more evil belief systems than that, of course. The Catholic Church, for example, created an overly contrived system of heaven, hell, and purgatory, a hierarchy of different afterlife locations to which someone could end up, depending on their public status, and of course, depending on how much money they had contributed to the Catholic Church in their lifetime. Now, for sure, I feel like the Catholic Church created this hierarchy of afterlife locations as a form of control over their followers, using fear as a motivator in order to encourage certain actions out of their congregation. They'd be like, oh, your 1-month-old son died before he was baptized? Well, I guess he'll be doomed to an eternity of wandering through purgatory blind unless you give the church a whole lot of money and then perform a whole bunch of prayers and ceremonies in our name. But the most terrifying belief system that I've ever encountered surrounding the afterlife is the concept of the soul trap, the prison planet. The idea is that we're forced to reincarnate onto the earth over and over and over again, trying to battle and overcome all of the negative karma that we've accumulated over our many lifetimes. And every time that we pass away and our soul tries to ascend beyond this place, we hit some sort of a barrier that forces us back onto the earth. And in this process, we forget everything about who we are, where we are, and what we are, and we're forced to live yet another lifetime where we have to try to battle and overcome the negative karma that we've accumulated in the previous lifetime. This belief system takes the concept concept of original sin and expands it into this ever-growing debt that just keeps building up more and more interest that we could never possibly pay off. A debt that's impossible to settle. Do you believe in ghosts? Do you think that ghosts might be the spirits of deceased humans that are wandering the earth and have not yet passed on to the other side? I mean, I believe in ghosts. I've had far too many experiences to dismiss that phenomenon as a myth. But I don't believe that ghosts are spirits of humans that have passed on. Maybe there are ways for us to communicate and connect with our ancestors, but I don't think you're ever going to encounter the ghost of your grandma or your dog for that matter. I believe that we do experience something after we pass on. But wandering the earth as an invisible, mute ghost, I don't think is one of the possible outcomes after we pass on. There are several Eastern traditions that seem to line up perfectly with the soul trap reincarnation belief system. The New Age community has stolen and commodified a litany of different concepts from Eastern traditions like this. So if any of this sounds familiar to you, that's probably where you heard about it first, as a cynical sales pitch for New Age enlightenment. Just so you know, these concepts do not belong to white women from California. These traditions are a lot older than that. In my expert YouTube video creator opinion, Earth does appear to be a soul trap. We are condemned to reincarnate here onto the Earth over and over again, losing our memory every time, forcing us to wander the Earth clueless, naive, forgetting who and what we are, keeping us clueless to the truth of our reality. Reincarnation especially is not a new belief. Buddhism is centered around the idea of reincarnation and karmic debt. Their religious leader, their version of the Pope, the Dalai Lama, is believed to be the reincarnation of the last Dalai Lama, who was the reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lama, who was the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama before him, and so on and so on. Many Buddhists believe that they're on a path to ascension, overcoming all of the karma from their previous lifetimes, allowing them to escape this place, hoping that one day they'll break out of this corporeal existence and become ascended masters in the higher heavens. But even within Buddhism, there's a good deal of debate as to whether or not any of their monks or any of their followers have ever managed to do this. I mean, just thinking about it, if their religious leader, the Dalai Lama, has always been here and he keeps coming back, that's not a good sign that they're actually making any progress to escaping. Some Buddhists believe that there's an entire council of ascended masters that are watching over us, guiding us, helping us ascend and grow, guiding humanity like deities, or like the angels would do. But there are also Buddhists that believe that overcoming karma is so time-consuming and would take so many lifetimes of dedication that nobody has managed to do it yet. They'll say that it's possible that somebody has managed to ascend into the realms above ours, but they'll also say that it's likely that nobody has managed to do that yet. I know that I've accumulated a fairly secular, wide variety of followers over the years, so I know that there's a handful of atheists watching this video that believe that all of this is nonsense anyways. I know some of you think that there's nothing when we pass on, believing that we simply cease to exist after our life is over. But I guarantee you that there's not a single person watching this that hasn't at least spent some time thinking about what happens in the afterlife, wondering if there isn't more to existence and more to our experience beyond what we see here while we're alive. And I guarantee you that there's very few people watching this that haven't wondered if there is some sort of a heaven in the afterlife, hoping that they'll be allowed to enter after they pass on. Death is a scary thing, and it's a difficult thing for people to accept. Mortality is terrifying. I would certainly love to know what you believe about the afterlife. I bet when you look at the comments, you're going to find a wide variety of different ideas and theories about the afterlife that you've probably never even considered before. I was raised Christian, so naturally growing up, I adopted the classical concept of heaven and hell, God and the devil, paradise and eternal damnation. The Christian belief system is really weird, though. They believe that you're born onto this earth one time, and after your small, tiny fraction of a lifetime, all of the decisions that you've made, all of the actions you've performed, will determine your eternity, whether you get to live in paradise or you're tormented forever. However, over the years, obviously, I've spent a lot of time looking at the beliefs of other traditions, other cultures throughout history, and I've listened to a wide variety of different near-death experiences from people who have claimed to have almost died, yet came back to life. And what I find interesting about near-death experiences is that there's actually a wide variety of different things people have described, but also you'll find these sorts of similarities within giant groups of them. People describing extremely common experiences after they pass. The very first NDE that I ever heard about was from a man who claimed to convert to Christianity after he came back to life. This man described an extremely terrifying experience where he had passed away in a hospital and then found himself out of his body in what he described as sort of a hyper-reality, a reality that was way more real than ours. But he claimed that while he was there, he encountered these bizarre entities that kept trying to lure him into the darkness. He would follow them sort of incrementally, but every time he hesitated to move forward, the entities again would try to compel him to follow them further. And eventually, he found himself completely lost in the darkness. He said that these entities attacked him and began dragging him towards a terrible energy. Now, the second ever NDE I ever heard was from a Christian woman who claimed that she went to hell after she passed. This woman explained that while she was temporarily deceased, she began to fall through the earth. She eventually found herself in hell, where she could hear the screaming and the torment of millions of souls. And as the overwhelming feeling of hopelessness came over her, she called out to Jesus to save her. What happened on the operating table?
I died. My spirit left my body. And I looked up and I thought, oh, I'm going up to heaven. And then I looked down. Here I was headed headfirst for hell. I saw the flames burning underneath me. Then I began to smell the stench. I saw the smoke. Oh, it was just horrible. And of course, it scared me to death. I hesitated. What do I do? I'll call on Jesus. I knew him as a child. I know him now. So I called Jesus, Jesus, Jesus 3 times. And as I did that, he came from above me and held out his hands and caught me. And he looked into my face. And I noticed his beautiful eyes. And he said, Inez, call me by name. He said, if you will serve me, I'll save you. And I promised him I would. Oh, yes, I was just more than happy to. And so what he did was just pick me up, lifted me up, and lifted me, carried me up until I came to. And then, at that time, I knew I came from being dead. I came alive. And when I woke up, I heard I was in a room with just one light burning above in the ceiling. I thought that was funny. And then I looked around and I saw a nurse. And I said to her, I know who I am. I'm on Wisconsin, Dawes. I'm in the University Hospital. And this nurse, so shaking her hands up, she ran out of there.
Where were you when you woke up?
I was in the morgue with all the dead bodies.
I heard those for the first time like 15 or 20 years ago. That's like old internet now. While writing the script for this video, I managed to find a clip of another woman who also claimed to have had an experience in hell.
I was in complete darkness. There was no sound. I had no idea where I was. I wasn't scared. I just got just kind of confused and kind of hung out. And then eventually this kind of a reddish glow started happening. It was getting too warm. It smelled awful. And then I started hearing shrieking and screaming. And I thought to myself, this can't be good. And as I thought that, this voice boomed out of the fog, you know where you are. My mind raced, and all I could come up with was hello. And the voice boomed back with this maniacal laugh. And I took off, running, turned left, and took off into the darkness. And then this demon woman came up, and she said, come with me, you're one of us now. I said to her, I've been here a long time, I've been through a lot. Why does it seem particularly depressing right now? Am I just getting tired? And she says, oh no, it's Christmas on Earth. That's always the worst day of the world. And I just said, Christmas, huh? And I started singing a Christmas carol. I love Away in a Manger, so I started. Away in a manger, and she turned around and she said, shut up. You know, a couple of younger ladies got a smile on their face, and they said, no crib for his bed. She said, I mean it, you're gonna be sorry. And then we said, the little Lord, and she shrieked and jumped out and I closed my eyes and opened my eyes as this bright light came on. But this time, it was blissful, it was joyful, it was full of love, it was an incredible feeling that you don't ever feel on Earth. Even if everything, the best things that ever happened to you were all rolled into one, they would pale by comparison. So I was enjoying this absolute wondrous love, and I'd forgotten everything that had happened before. It wasn't a harsh light, it was a warm light, and as it kind of dimmed a little bit, it took shape, and it looked almost like cathedral or something, but there was no pictures or anything. It was just like white marble. And as I looked up, I thought, oh my goodness, that's my friend that died last month. He looked wonderful. He looked younger. He looked about 35. And I thought, huh, that's funny. And he's laughing. And he walked over slowly and just said, now, Mary Kay, you've got too much left in you. I said, what? They're sending me back?
Right now, there's a woman currently traveling the world sharing her near-death experience when she lost her life to cancer.
I was in the coma, and I left my body. It felt as though I left my body, and I felt incredible. It was like I had come out of my body, and I was aware of everything that was happening in the room, but I felt light and free and just incredible, like better than I had ever felt in my life before, ever. And I felt enveloped by something that, I call it unconditional love, but actually there's no words to describe it. You know, when I just say love, we overuse the word love, and it just doesn't capture what I felt. It was euphoric. It was just powerful, free. I just felt really incredible, but I was no longer attached to my physical body. I could see and hear everything that was going on all around, but I wasn't using my physical eyes because I didn't have physical eyes. I wasn't using my physical ears. It was something more powerful. It's like you don't have to turn your head to look. I had 360-degree peripheral vision, and I could see and hear everything the doctors were saying. It was like my world was expanding even more, and I became aware of other beings that were there to help me through this process. And what I felt from these other beings was nothing but pure, unconditional love. And I recognized some of them as my deceased loved ones, like my dad, my best friend.
Her story is a little too long to go through in this video, but her experience was so profound that it completely changed her perspective on life. And that's one of the most common themes with near-death experiences. People claim that when they come back, their perspective of reality has changed so much that their attitude changes completely. Their outlook evolves and expands.
I realized while I was there that when we cross over, not only do we leave behind our physical bodies, but we leave behind our culture, our religion, our beliefs, and all the baggage that we've accumulated over our lifetime. And the only thing that crosses over is our pure consciousness, our pure essence, or I like to call it pure love, or we can even call it pure God. We can call it God, the God consciousness part of us.
She was overwhelmed with the peace and the feeling of God's love and forgiveness, which enveloped every inch of existence. But most impressively, she was given insight into her past lives. She saw them as separate experiences that were all lived by her same soul over and over again. But there have also been a couple of celebrities who have described very similar things in the past. For example, Jeremy Renner just passed away a couple of years ago, and when he came back to life, he described to the world an extremely similar experience.
The near-death experiences I realized was quite a thing after I wrote about it. It's interesting to hear other people's stories because it's almost word for word. My experiences are almost no different than anybody else's. It's a beautiful, beautiful day. To me, it's like you can see behind the curtain, and there's some sort of solace that comes out. Look, I didn't want to come back. And just look that way. Somehow, some way, I was pulled back. Well, how did you know what to come back? If you're in my shoes, you think the same thing. It's the most pure, beautiful existence there is to be. When you witness, when you die, it's not through your eyes. When you're vision, you don't breathe. There's no time, place, or space. I'd love to do anything that exists beyond this rock. It's something it's the DNA of our spirit. Love. You experience your life with you have anyone you ever loved, anything that is attached to love is there with you at all time, place, space. There's everything and everyone is there. It is the most electric piece. It's fiery, beautiful piece.
And several years ago, Sharon Stone also described a similar near-death experience on the Oprah Winfrey Show.
I had that whole white light thing.
You did? At what point?
After the MRI, I was unconscious in the tube, and then when I came out of it and they talked to me, and then I kind of had that thing where it's sort of like passing out, except you have I had an incredible sense of well-being in a sense that it's just so near. It's not a far away or a scary thing. And
I mean, just really, that's interesting. I've never heard it described that way.
Loving and gentle, and okay. And there's nothing to be afraid of. It felt peaceful and serene, and like either thing would work out. But yet I really was sure that I wanted to live and be with myself.
And she talked about it again more recently on some morning program.
I had a near-death experience. People discuss these in many ways. They discuss them from a scientific perspective and discuss them also from a spiritual perspective. I believe that they're both. When this happened to me, I had all of these things that most people talk about, where you see this kind of light, that you leave your body, that you have this feeling of being pulled outward and upward. I had a sense of seeing the people that had gone before me. I had a sense of communicating with them, but then I was back in the room.
The subject of passing away, and by extension, the subject of grief, has become really taboo in our modern era. People become really uncomfortable when the subject comes up in conversation. In fact, that subject is so taboo today that you're not even really allowed to use that four-letter word on most platforms without running the risk of your content becoming age-restricted or demonetized. I mean, the kids have their new catchy phrases that they use to get away with talking about subjects like that today, but I don't really like using those phrases because they make the subject sound kind of silly and shallow. I'm sure that death has always been a confusing and difficult thing for humans to deal with. Even since before we evolved into sapiens, our ancestors would have had to have struggled to understand what death means and try to quantify it so that they can live with loss and process their grief. A lot of people believe that our concept of the afterlife only really exists as a way for us to hold on to our ancestors after they pass because we can't really fathom what is happening. But rituals around passing away have existed before we were sapiens. The oldest believed burial site of human ancestors was found by archaeologists in South Africa. A hominid group called Homo naledi appears to have been intentionally leaving their remains in the Rising Star Cave. We could be wrong about this being a burial site. It's so difficult to get to the remains that it's possible that they were just trapped in that cave. But if you're right and this burial site was used as an intentional tomb by Homo naledi, then that means humans have been performing intentional burial rituals for their loved ones and tribe members for over 200,000 years. But it's impossible to know what they believed about the afterlife, if they believed anything at all. Our first historical example of some sort of belief system around an afterlife comes much later than that. Google will tell you that the oldest known belief system around an afterlife comes from the dynastic Egyptians with their kingdom of the dead, but that's not exactly true. There's a culture that's much older than Egypt, and even Sumeria for that matter, that gives us some kind of a hint as to a belief system around an afterlife. I've talked about the traditions of the people of Göbekli Tepe in a video I made a year or two ago about the dead god. That video was just a lot of poetic guessing and hypotheses that I cobbled together based on theories that I've heard over the years, and I explained it a lot better in that video than I'm going to explain it here. But basically, we do know a good deal about that time period in Mesopotamia. to stay connected with the deceased family members. The people of Quebec, Kentucky were one of these cultures. Archaeologists found quite a few skulls stored in what appears to be the main living spaces of their structures. Historians refer to the beliefs around these practices as a skull cult. There are still several cultures today that observe similar practices. If you think about it, it's not really that different from the way that we keep the ashes of grandma on our mantle in the living room. That's how some of us like to stay connected to our loved ones and keep them in our lives. But what makes Quebec, Kentucky unique to this skull cult practice is that they also have carvings on some of their pillars that appear to depict headless bodies dancing and running around. As far as we can tell, this seems to imply that after the mummified head of the deceased loved ones were collected, somehow their now headless bodies would continue on in some kind of an afterlife existence. This is a truly monumental finding, and I'm really shocked that people don't talk about this more. Another aspect of these ancient cultures that doesn't get discussed very much is their concept of ancestor worship. Back in that time, priests or the shaman of the tribe used to take hallucinogenic substances as part of a ceremony. They would then crawl into some sort of a cubby hole that was either carved into stone or into a wall. Sometimes it was a hole in the ground or some sort of a grotto on a ceremonial hill. And while the shaman was hallucinating in that hole, they would set their intentions to communicate with different kinds of spirits. And when they were done, they would emerge from that hole and share with the rest of the tribe everything that they believed that they learned during that experience of talking to the spirits. Often, the shaman would communicate with the ancestors of the tribe. Their belief was that the ancestors would help offer guidance and wisdom to allow the tribe to survive and flourish. I was Christian when I was young, but as I was getting older, I began breaking away from the dogmatic teachings of Christianity, and I came to adopt what I believed at the time to be an extremely unique belief system. At least I had never heard anybody else say it before, until one day I encountered the beliefs of an extremely ancient tribe that is still around today. I'm convinced that we do reincarnate back on the earth after we pass away. But I don't think that we can just reincarnate into anyone. I don't think that it's completely random where we end up. I believe that our DNA plays a pivotal role in informing who we can reincarnate into. Think of our DNA as like a radio, and our spirit is like a radio signal that can with certain antennae. Now, I know this is really hard to imagine today because the world is so different now, but basically, in ancient times, humans used to just stick to their own individual tribal groups. Sometimes people would mix and intermarry with people from other tribes, obviously, but that was kind of the exception. The rule used to be that tribes were really more like extended family groups. And you can see this with the way that they behaved and the way that they cooperated with each other. The tribe would share responsibilities with one another. Women would raise each other's children. Everyone would all share food and lodging. They would all cooperate to survive. And that used to be fine back then because our DNA used to contain a lot more diversity. Much like emperor penguins, you wouldn't know it by looking at them, but even though every single one of them looks entirely identical, the emperor penguin population has exponentially more diversity than the human.
Ouch.
obviously we couldn't do that today because our DNA now lacks that diversity, because the human population was brought down to like 5 or 10% of what it used to be somewhere around 10 to 12,000 years ago. I don't know how that happened. It's a big mystery. So it makes a lot more sense today for us to interbreed with people from other families and other races. I say this a lot, but race mixing is a good thing. If the human species is meant to survive, we had to diversify our DNA.
Yes,
12,000
I've said
years
that
ago,
too.
that wasn't really an issue.
Well, something similar.
5 of a couple hundred or 1,000 people would have had more than enough genetic diversity to intermarry for generations without any noticeable effects or birth defects. But anyways, the point is that you can understand that when a community is that tight-knit, when they're all just one big extended family, they would all share a collective connection to their ancestors. They would all feel collective grief over their lost loved ones. So anyways, as I was saying, my belief of reincarnation is that we reincarnate into people that share aspects of our DNA, meaning we basically have to reincarnate into our own family members, into our own offspring, our own nieces and nephews and grandchildren. Our DNA plays an important aspect in the reincarnation process. So we basically have to incarnate into somebody that has a common ancestor with us. And this is part of the reason I believe that elite families and royal families still intermarry with themselves. Yes, part of that is so that they can keep the wealth and the power in their family, but it's also so that they can keep track of all the reincarnated souls of their family members. They keep their spirits and their souls all in the same family. So when they're reincarnating, they're not just reincarnating into some random place with a common ancestor, they're reincarnating back into that same wealth and power. They might not get to be king every time, but Duke of Yorkshire is still better than some guy that sweeps chimneys for a living. When our controllers broke our traditional family system and broke us up into individual families, individuals that have to struggle to survive, struggle to earn, struggle to feed their children, and they convinced our ancestors to give up all of their wealth for their own personal benefit so they can enjoy lavish retirement. They took away our ability to keep our spiritual soul family groups together. It wasn't even really that long ago that large families would stick together, they would build wealth together, they build businesses together, run farms together. And when our controllers broke that system up and made us all divide into our own households, that was a form of spiritual warfare. So when we return to Earth, we don't even just lose our own individual memories, but we're not even born into a system where we can learn our own family history. It wasn't just about breaking up our own financial security as a family. Because when you learn about your family's history, your family's past, you're learning about your own history. When you're learning about your ancestors and the things that they've done, you're learning about possible things that you've done in previous lifetimes. So basically, our spiritual family used to all be able to stick together in one tribe, in one extended family group. But now, because our family groups have been scattered across the earth, we've lost any kind of individual spiritual or familial sovereignty. So anyways, as I was saying, I believed that that was a unique thought. I'm sure other people have come to that conclusion before. I'm not saying I'm the first one. I'm just saying I never heard that before ever. That is until one day, while I was doing research for my Fallen Angels video, I decided I was going to mention the Dogon tribe because they're a very ancient tribe that's still around today that has traditions that go back before the dynastic Egyptians. And just for fun, because I was mentioning them anyways, I decided to do a bit of a deep dive on the Dogon just to see what they were all about. And that's when I came across their beliefs on the afterlife. The Dogon also believe that we reincarnate into our own families and that our ancestors will one day come back as our own children, our own nieces and nephews, and our own grandchildren. When I found that, I almost screamed. What this means is that during the time that the Dogon first formed, there was likely a multitude of cultures and tribes that believed that exact same thing. Knowing this, that makes the concept of ancestor worship and ancestor light is a trap. When we pass through the light, that is when our memory is wiped. That's when we're sent back to the earth, doomed to wander this place once again, naive and clueless as to who and what we are. We're recycled back into the soul trap system, doomed to live yet another life of suffering, confusion, isolation, pain, and grief. While we're here on the earth, living our lives as corporeal beings in the third dimension, we're separated from creation source. We're separated from the collective consciousness of the universe. We're separated from God. While we're trapped in these human bodies, we have no choice but to trust the systems of this earth, to play the games that they set before us. Our naivety is exploited. Our energy is harvested. And our souls are confined to this limited existence. Now, obviously, I believe Scientology is complete bullshit. There's no reason to trust that cult, but I find it extremely interesting that L. Ron Hubbard centered their core belief around the idea that this planet was saturated with the imprisoned souls of billions of aliens from across the galaxy that were brought here against their will. Like they told us on South Park, their bodies were dumped here and their souls can never leave this place. The Bible teaches us that the God of this earth is the evil one, Satan. But even the Gnostic texts describe an extremely similar concept to the soul trap system.
The Gnostic tradition offers us a radical version of apocalyptic thought, the end of the world, not as catastrophe, but as liberation. These diverse spiritual movements share a compelling premise that our material reality is not a divine creation to be celebrated, but a cosmic prison from which the enlightened must escape.
In the secret gospel of John, the earth is described as being ruled by evil archons who exploit and feed off humanity's naivety and spiritual blindness. And they feed off their negative energy like pain, suffering, grief, sadness, anger. Their goal is to cause us pain. That is their food source. I mean, hell, even Plato described the same basic concept within the logic